Next, I would really like to introduce Gemma Godivala. She's a civil funeral celebrant. Gemma's planning to share with us a little of what it's like to be a funeral celebrant. She says when it comes to funerals, there is virtually nothing you can't do or anything that you must do.
Thank you. Let me take you for a moment to a graveside in Dublin. Do I press it again? Here we go.
Go ahead anyway. Hello? 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 Let me out! Where the fuck am I? Hello? Hello? Let me out! The fucking dark in here!
Sorry, please excuse that brief profanity. It is Ireland, after all. And it continues for a while in that vein. Just a glorious prank, but I imagine at least half of you are doing a little mental audit of all the processes that ensure that that could never, ever happen. I'm standing in today at fairly short notice for one of your local funeral directors who had to decline. I'm not a funeral director, I'm a funeral celebrant. So my role in a service is akin to that of a minister, the officiant at the funeral itself. There are 3 elements to my role. I meet with the family for probably a couple of hours and receive the download, so to speak. We spend most of the meeting just talking about their loved one so that I can get a really good impression of who they were as a person and write a ceremony that perfectly captures and honours them and brings their character and memory into the chapel. The second part is when I go away and write up the script, in most instances writing the main eulogy at the family's request. And part 3 is where I reconnect with family at the graveside or the crematorium and deliver the service that we have collectively created. So if I were a funeral director, an undertaker, standing here, as was intended, the link between your jobs and mine might be more obvious. The continuity of care as a deceased person passes from your hands into those of an undertaker. So how are our jobs connected? Well, let me tell you a story that might illustrate that. It was the night after my very first ever funeral service, which happened to be a burial in a natural woodland burial site up in Olney. The fact that it wasn't a nice straightforward cremation for which my training had prepared me so well, and it had all the uncertainties of an outdoor location, meant that it was a real baptism of fire, and it took all my concentration, not least to try not to look like it was taking all of my concentration. It went very well. And late that night, I was telling my husband and my son all about it, and my son said something, I wish I could remember what, that made me sit bolt upright and exclaim in surprise, "She was there!" In the midst of everything, I had completely forgotten, sounds ridiculous, I had completely forgotten that the coffin contained the deceased body of the lady whose funeral it was. As a mourner, I have always been very, very aware of the arrival of my loved one and their presence in the coffin. But on this occasion, the coffin had just become some funeral paraphernalia that I didn't have to think about because that bit was the funeral director's responsibility. And I worried that I had straight away become too detached in my role. Had I forgotten the core of what I was doing? And then I thought, no. The funeral directors had brought Dorothy in a box. I had brought Dorothy in my folder. They were carrying her body. I was carrying her story, which was exactly where my focus should be. Although I do frequently make a point of reminding myself now, as I look over at a coffin during the reflection music, that a beloved family member is lying there, and I think of the impact that may be having on the people in the congregation. So, my role in a service is all centered around a person's story. Not just the facts, dates, locations, but who they were, the human connections, the passions and interests, the character. And it is my perception that that is part of your job, all of you in palliative care, perhaps more than any other branch of medicine. When I was privileged to have a tour of this facility back in April, I was told numerous wonderful stories of how staff here had sought to recreate or create for patients experiences and environments that were deeply enriching for them and absolutely tailored to their personalities. And I enjoyed hearing what Ros had to share about the virtual reality and the sand in her toes. During my own experience of having a loved one in palliative care, I was struck that the staff in such a place have a real awareness that they don't just have a patient. Like me, they have a whole family who need a bit of TLC through a really difficult time. And so what are some of the ways that a funeral service can be tailored to reflect the central person? Well, right from the start, the star of the show can arrive in style. I was recently helping a friend with the service for her husband, and he made his very last journey by bus. He was such a bus fanatic that upon retirement as a teacher, he took up bus driving, largely for fun, and worked well into retirement on his beloved Red Rose line. I know there's at least one Route Master bus that has been converted into a hearse. Mourners can ride on the top deck. For Stephen, his colleagues just provided one of their ordinary buses, and a nice, relaxed, small, independent funeral director improvised whatever wedging and bracing needed to be done as a cursory nod to health and safety. I've conducted services where the deceased has arrived in a VW camper van hearse, a Land Rover hearse, a horse-drawn hearse, a motorbike and sidecar hearse, how cool, and my personal favourite, a neighbour's flatbed truck. And still on my own personal professional bucket list is Del Boy's yellow Reliant Robin from Only Fools and Horses. Yes, the Trotters Independent Trading Company van hearse is a thing. There's a little postscript to the story of the service with the flatbed truck. After a funeral, I am usually one of the last to leave. I wait and I see the family off. But in this tiny village cemetery, I was getting the distinct impression the family were loitering, waiting till I had left. I was in danger of getting awkward, so I made my farewell and headed to my car. I hadn't even pulled out of the car park when I heard a volley of fireworks going off behind me at the graveside. If they could have told me, I would not have minded. Short of fireworks, there are some lovely symbolic actions that can be incorporated into a funeral service, which give form to the feelings that you are processing. Earlier this year, at the close of a service I conducted, 2 doves were released into the sky by a grieving foster mum and an absolutely broken brother in honour of a 19-year-old man who had taken his own life. The mum reported back to me afterwards that that act had brought real healing. The image of freedom after constraint, of sunshine after darkness, spoke to her soul. For altogether lighter reasons, last summer I released about a dozen butterflies from their airy netted container. The lady whom they were honouring used to purchase butterfly larvae each summer and release them onto her gorgeous balcony, which she had stuffed full of potted plants. Small parting gifts for guests can be a lovely touch. After celebrating the life of one gentleman, each member of the congregation went home with a chocolate bar and a miniature of Jack Daniels so that they could enjoy what their late friend would have considered a perfect evening. And aside from these ideas, there are many simple, cost-free ways of creating a multi-sensory celebration of someone's life. The skilled needlewoman whose beautiful artwork was on display in the chapel. The wood turner who had turned so many random little objects that everyone was invited to choose one and take it home as a memento. The farmer whose daughter wore wellies with her elegant funeral outfit. A congregation full of people wearing splashes of a favourite colour, or maybe even a particular football strip. A much-loved dog, the fur baby of the lady who had died, paging in front of the hearse, resplendent in a smart bow, and walking so nicely beside a very accommodating funeral director. And of course, music, the artistic element that everyone's minds go to when planning a funeral. Think of the most wildly inappropriate song for a funeral service, and I can probably beat it. One of my favourite unorthodox approaches I took occurred last December when I was conducting the service for a very popular amateur dramatics performer who loved nothing more than being a pantomime dame, and 'twas the season. And I asked his partner whether she wanted the curtains to close at the point of committal. Well, first of all, we didn't call it the committal. I always offer families a choice over terminology, and that word is very much falling out of favour. More commonly, people prefer a softer term, such as farewell, or even something bespoke. We've said bonjour to an Only Fools and Horses fan, auf Wiedersehen pet to a Geordie. We've called last orders for an old barfly, or departure time, complete with whistle, for a train spotter. Well, for our panto dame, we were calling the culmination of the service final curtain. But his partner didn't want the service to finish with the curtains closed. Another action that is falling out of fashion. Until I suggested, what if we use the curtains like theatre curtains, close them and open them again, while giving our leading man a rousing standing ovation. And so that is what we did. We gave Malcolm a curtain call. And rather than sombre silence, we had stamping of feet, roars of encore, whistles and cheers, conveying the appreciation of the whole congregation in the very language that the deceased would best understand. Of course, all these ideas I have spoken of are about more, making more of a service. And we are living in a world where there is a shift towards less. Is that wholly a good thing? No more jokes. This is a serious point. There has been a dramatic rise in the numbers of direct cremations in the last few years, which is changing the industry, and I'm not sure for the better. It always seems to me that fitting all the ceremony and honour around the end of someone's life into a half hour at a crematorium is woefully inadequate. But for some people, even that prospect seems too much, and they opt for no ceremony at all. Often, the request has been made by the deceased themselves in an effort to lift burden from their loved ones. But I fear people may underestimate their family's need to say goodbye in a meaningful way. Numerous times I have been contacted after a direct cremation to belatedly conduct some sort of memorial service for a family whose mum and dad had sorted their own affairs to shield their children from any sort of bother. And then those children came to regret that they hadn't had closure, or that their mum's amazing story hadn't been heard, or that friends and neighbours were left wondering what had happened. It might sound odd to say it, but a family might need that bother. It could be an important part of their grieving process. I'm very drawn to some of the traditions that cultures other than my own have surrounding death. The Jewish ritual of sitting Shiva, 7 days of mourning after a funeral, when family members stay at home together and are visited by friends and acquaintances. The practice of assisting in the washing and dressing of a body, undertaken by those of numerous faiths, including Hinduism and Islam. The West Indian tradition of backfilling, staying at the cemetery until the grave has been completely filled in, with every able male family member having grabbed a shovel and broken a sweat. And what about our delightful Dublin prankster from the beginning of my talk? Aside from how to scare the bejesus out of your loved ones, what else could we learn from Shay Bradley's funeral? Well, if his death went the traditional Irish way, his body will have lain in an open coffin, surrounded by family, friends, and acquaintances, sharing stories, singing songs, eating sandwiches and sipping tea, or likely something stronger, taking 3 days to perform humanity's oldest rite. In 2023, Ulster University researchers found that traditional Irish rituals for the departed may help people to cope with bereavement. The study involved more than 2,000 people, focused on PGD, prolonged grief disorder, and found a 30% reduction among bereaved people in Ireland. A wise man once said, "The only way to take the sorrow out of death is to take the love out of life." Grief is simply a new pathway for love. Death is sad. Grieving is healthy. Give it the time and space that it needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gemma. You made us laugh and made us think. Now we're going to just have a moment for questions for both Gemma and for Ros Taylor. There will be... Oh, tea. Up to you, you're the boss.
Anybody's got any burning questions with Gemma or I?
If not, we're back at 3:10. Oh, okay. Wait.
Sorry, guys. Gemma, do you ever, you seem very,
We need the... We're recording this, Julie.
big voice.
She's doing fine.
Not big enough.
Sorry, colleagues, delaying your tea. Question for Gemma. Come over as deeply compassionate. Do you ever almost lose your composure?
Some funerals are harder than others. If it's a young person or a child, that's different, and that's where I might need to pay some attention to my own self-care. But no, I'm largely able to remind myself that this is not my grief. Oops, what did I do? I did conduct my mum's funeral service just under 2 years ago. I couldn't sit and watch somebody else make a mess of it, could I? And I did things slightly differently because I had to make it an opportunity for me to mourn as well as holding that space for others. It was the easiest service ever to write, but the hardest one to deliver. But no, largely I'm able to gulp it down and slip into professional mode. Thank you.